Okay, the stream is connected. Cynthia, you may begin the meeting.
Great, thanks. Hello, I'm Cynthia Schendel, and I serve as co-chair of the Social Work Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. We are meeting today on August 12th, 2025. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Andrea Perdomo Morales,
Present.
Donna Honer-Queel, Jasmine Cohen Young, Mary Gill, Mike Gillette, Lee Ann Gingery,
I'm here.
Yolando Johnson, Christy Sanders,
Present.
thank you, Eric Schoneker,
Present.
Robin Unruh, Callie Worth,
Present.
thank you and welcome, Annis Boyer,
Present.
great. I note the following BSRB staff members are also present: David Fye and Leslie Allen. Is Leslie with us?
Leslie should be joining us when we talk about the survey or the supervision manual. So she's not in attendance at the moment, but she should be joining us later.
Okay. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning the meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Cynthia. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about any concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or the KOMA, does not require advisory committee members to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at this meeting as no individuals requested time for public comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of the KOMA are not suspended. Therefore, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On June 23rd, 2025, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals that requested notice of such meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to the executive director, david.fye@ks.gov, with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. Notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And Cynthia, before we begin, I did check the conference call line. We do have one visitor who's observing the meeting, and I'll actually recognize that person now if they would like to state their name for the record as a visitor at the advisory committee meeting. So if there's an individual on the conference call line, please feel free to introduce yourself. Well, thank you, Madison. Happy to have you. And Cynthia, I'll turn it back over to you. So appreciate the recognition.
Okay, thank you. The first item on our agenda will be to ask if there are any modifications to the agenda as was sent to you last night. Anyone have any changes or modifications? Hearing none, we will move on to welcoming our new committee members. And you all received also attached to the materials that David sent a list of all the advisory committee members and what our licensure levels are and where we are located. So we are happy to have a cross section from across the state. And we would, what I would ask is that Callie and Annis maybe would take a minute and introduce themselves and tell us about your work and where you're located. Callie, you want to start?
Sure. My name is Callie Worth. I am currently working as a school counselor at an elementary school in Hayes, and I also do some private practice work in the evening times. I recently became trained in PCIT, and so a lot of my work is with children and families and helping to kind of hopefully help curb that need of parents not knowing what to do. I've worked at St. Francis, and I also worked as an outpatient therapist at a local mental health center. So yeah, that's what I do.
That's
Thank you.
great. Thank you very much. Annis?
Hi, I'm Annis Boyer. I am in Lawrence. I'm currently the Director of Youth Community Services at Burt Nash, our community mental health center in Douglas County. And I have been here for 2 years, so not super long, and also do private practice on the side, so evenings and weekends. And I was a professor, adjunct professor at KU for about 12 years, and have worked in a variety of other places in this region. Have done work with addiction. I've done welfare to work. Child welfare, all kinds of things. I've been around for a minute, but and I'm happy to be here.
That's great. Welcome to both of you. And it strikes me that we have a great cross section of different types of social work. There's so many different ways to practice social work, and I love that we have all of these different connections that everyone has worked in the field. Okay, so David, I think you were going to give us a short summary of the advisory committee member expectations, which will be review for most of us and new for Callie and Annis.
Great. Well, thank you, Cynthia. Yes, as advisory committee members for a state agency, there are some laws and rules that I wanted to make sure that everyone is reminded of. And for those of you that are new members to the advisory committee, I just want to let you know we will do a more comprehensive training that goes over things like the Kansas Open Meetings Act and the Kansas Open Records Act, and also general duties as an advisory committee member for a board like the BSRB. But I did want to give you some preliminary information. And so as it relates to working for a committee like this, since we are an advisory committee for a state agency, that means that if there's a majority of members that would have interactive discussion outside of a meeting, and it would involve subject matter relevant to the work of the committee, that would need to happen at an open meeting. And so that's one of the reasons why we have these advisory committee meetings, and we put out notice in advance, and we broadcast these meetings to try to help members participate by viewing, or they could request time for public comment if there's a topic they would like to speak on. So if you're used to working with different groups that aren't subject to the open meetings rule, we always like to make sure people aren't caught off guard by that. Sometimes in other groups, you can do a lot of work together, maybe by email communication back and forth, and then come to the committee for some other business. In this kind of a forum, you have to watch out even for emails, because if there's interactive discussion by email back and forth, that could potentially constitute an open meetings violation. So it's okay to reach out to myself as executive director for the BSRB. And I'm always happy to help you. If you wanted to reach out to the co-chairs, that's fine too. The quorum for this committee is 7 members. So you just need to make sure if there is interactive discussion outside of a meeting, that it doesn't involve a majority of members of the committee. Now, it's okay if you should happen to run into each other at a social setting or something like that, because those are the big 3 things that need to be present. It needs to be majority of members of the committee, that there's interactive discussion back and forth, and that it would involve subject matter relevant to the work of the committee. So as long as one of those 3 things is not present, you should be fine. But I always like to make sure people are very aware of that. And then second, as professionals, I'm sure you don't need any kind of reminder about this, but all of your communications could be potentially considered records. And we all know, official letters can be considered records and documents, but even things like emails could be considered records. And so as an advisory committee for the BSRB, potentially your communications in this capacity could be considered records. So you always you want to make sure that you're staying professional with any communication, and just be mindful of the things that involve the work of this committee. But Like I said, we'll have a more comprehensive training. I just wanted to kind of outline some legal topics to be aware of. In the past, what we've done is we've done an hour or so training with all of the advisory committees, and we tried to schedule one of those at an advisory committee meeting during the year. This year, we're going to try something a little bit differently. And so instead of doing 7 different versions of the training with the 7 different advisory committees, what I'm going to do is make available about 4 different times, and then ask advisory committee members from all the advisory committees and all the board members to sign up for one of those 4 times. And then we can just go ahead and do the training in a few fewer sessions. And that way we also have more time available at advisory committee meetings like this. So you can do more work as an advisory committee. But in terms of other expectations, we will send out a lot of materials. Sometimes we will send it out well in advance. You have a lot of time to go through it. Other times it may be right to the meeting. But as best as possible, if you get the opportunity to review that before the meeting and then come in with questions or topics to be discussed, that's good. If we have a general idea of what we may discuss at a future meeting, we will try to give you a heads up so you can prepare for that from one meeting to the next. And then also be mindful about attendance as much as possible. For us to operate effectively as an advisory committee, it's helpful for members to attend as many meetings as possible. Now, sometimes there may be times that are going to be a conflict here or there. But we can always look to find another meeting if a number of members can't attend a meeting. So I'll turn it over to Cynthia and Andrea. And if they want to speak to any other expectations for members of the advisory committee, you could speak kind of broadly to that topic as well.
I think those were probably the most important points to be aware of right from the beginning of your service. I would just note that we meet only every other month, so you're talking about 6 meetings a year that and they're on the calendar well ahead, so hopefully everyone can block that time. And but certainly let us know if you do have a conflict. So if we, as Dave had said, if we have a less than a quorum that can attend on a particular planned date, we would look for an alternative date to make attendance more possible. Andrea, do you have any comment?
No, I think you both covered it. Thank you.
Okay, that's great.
And by the way, concerning one of the documents that Cynthia mentioned in your packet, there is the list of the current advisory committee members with their level of licenses under the BSRB and also the location. If any of that is slightly off, we did try to use things like your current location as best as we could identify that. So if things have changed or need to be updated, please let us know and we can update that information on the sheet. This information, as far as the location, is also on the BSRB website. If you go to the advisory committee page, you will see a current list of the advisory committee members and their locations. So just let us know if you ever see any issues with that and we can get it updated for you.
Great, thanks, Dave. Okay, so next on the agenda is the approval of 2 sets of minutes, because when we met in June, when we came to this point in the agenda, we did not have a quorum to approve the minutes from February. So we have 2 sets of minutes to approve, February 25th and June 16th. Is that right? Yeah, June 16th. Are there any changes or corrections? And if not, do I have a motion do I need to have separate motions, David, or can we do them both in one?
They can be combined. You can do a vote and have them both included.
Okay. This is Lee. I motion to accept them as read.
Thank you, Lee.
Second.
This is Eric. I second.
Great, thank you. All in favor, aye? Say aye. Thank you.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Both of those sets of minutes are approved. And now we will move to David's Executive Director's report.
All right, thank you. Every full board meeting, we try to provide some updates to the advisory committees about some items of BSRB operations. We also try to highlight any kind of legislative items for the committee. And additionally, if there's any items from the most recent board meetings, we'd like to make the advisory committee members aware of those things as well. So we'll start with a couple of notes about BSRB operations. First, at your last meeting, we talked a little bit about CE Broker. This is a company that the board had agreed to work with last year, and staff here at the office spent a lot of time meeting with representatives of CE Broker to make sure that they were building into their system our requirements for continuing education hours. Just if you are new to the advisory committee, What CE Broker is a company that works with licensing boards in Kansas and also other states. And it provides a free portal for licensees to upload documentation of their continuing education hours. So when you have completed hours, you could upload your documentation. You can assign it into certain categories, such as ethics or diagnosis and treatment. And then there's a couple of benefits. One, you don't have to hold on to the paper copies of those documents. Secondly, if you are selected for audit when you renew your license and you're utilizing CE Broker, you can notify us and we will go into the portal, check those documents, and finish the audit quickly for you. You are not required to use CE Broker, and so we did meet with some representatives from the company to see what the uptake has been in terms of individuals voluntarily activating an account with CE Broker so far, because we do have all 7 professions that are enabled to activate accounts. Sounds like so far, all individuals are eligible for a free account with CE Broker that will allow them the base level services. The way that CE Broker actually is able to offer these free services to licensing boards is that optionally individuals can pursue a paid level account, which provides some additional services such as linking someone to CE opportunities and some things like that. So we wanted to make sure that nobody was required to use CE Broker if they didn't want to, and that everyone would have access to those free accounts, but some people do choose to do the paid accounts. So between the free accounts and the paid accounts, what we have learned is there's about an 11% uptake with CE Broker so far. I think it's somewhere around maybe 1,600 people or so that have signed up across all the levels of licenses. So that's good so far. I think from what the feedback that I have heard is that some people don't activate their account unless they're coming close to their renewal date. And then they may be interested in activating the account, uploading their documentation. And my hope is that, because I have heard from some people that have said it can take a little bit of time the first time you're logging in, trying to upload and learning the system. My hope is that as people do that the first time, in future years, it'll be much easier for them to just return and then maybe do it as they go versus log in for the first time and then have to upload all the documentation for the entire previous 2-year period. So in general, most of the comments that I've heard have been pretty positive. We did ask them for some feedback in terms of how many service tickets that they have received in terms of people having issues with the site. And if I recall correctly, I believe they said for licensees, they've probably had somewhere between, I think it was 25 to 35 service-related tickets for licensees that have had issues. And so I think that's pretty good in general. And then there were a few other tickets that individuals had. We allow CE Broker for individuals to sign up if they want to be a pre-approved provider for the social work profession. So there have been some tickets related to that service as well. But overall, sounds like things are going well, at least from their perspective. We did ask them some questions about, how can we improve this process for our licensees and how can we make this something that people will want to opt into with a little more frequency. And they gave us some suggestions on more places that we can put the CE Broker information on the BSRB website. When we initially were coming out with it, we sent messages out to people. We posted a news story on the website. But we have also included some links to the CE Broker information on the professions pages. So that way, under the renewal section of the professions page, you have a link now to the CE Broker information. So that information is a little more available. So, so good feedback from CE Broker. In terms
David,
of other,
can I make a comment about this CE Broker? I just renewed and I used CE Broker to upload my information. And you said that when people are selected for audit, someone at the office there goes into the CE Broker and looks at what's posted, or do they, because CE Broker gives a pronouncement about whether your hours are complete for your state. They have the data for all the different states, and they'll say either it's complete or it's not. And what I found was that it wouldn't let me categorize a couple of my CEs the way that they needed to be to satisfy Kansas state requirements. And so they were saying that I didn't have all the hours but when actually I had more hours than I needed. So that might be something to talk with them about, fixing that glitch. But also, I just want to make sure that when you go in to check, that you don't just take what CE Broker says about whether you're in compliance or not. You actually review the CEs that have been submitted.
Yeah, it's a good question. So we have a sort of a long-term goal to be able to utilize CE Broker in a slightly different way than we're using them currently right now. Right now, what happens is that if someone is selected for audit, we will send a notice to them to say, you were selected for audit. Please let us know if you're currently using CE Broker services. And then if the person is using CE Broker services, we can go into the portal and take a look and then follow up with the person and say, here's what we were able to see in the portal. Everything either looks good or it looks like there are some items that are missing. And if that's the case, then our renewal specialist would follow up with the person to make sure that we have all the documentation. And like I said, CE Broker is an optional service. And so if some people aren't using it at all, then they would let us know they're not using CE Broker. And then we would ask them to provide the documentation like they would under a standard audit for the hours. So people can categorize it in the system, but our specialist is still going in there and verifying that the hours do meet our requirements.
Okay, great, thanks.
But thank you for the feedback on that. And yeah, like I said, there's a long-term goal. Our long-term goal is that we would like to have CE Broker built in a little bit more to the online renewal process. The ultimate goal, I think, will be when someone goes to renew their license and they try to renew it electronically, there will be a spot there where ultimately we would like them to be able to do a live link so that at that time that they are doing the renewal, they can check if the hours are all uploaded in CE Broker. Now, if they're not using CE Broker, it'll say, based on what we can see, we can't give you confirmation because we don't see anything in CE Broker. But for people who are using it, it would say, we're doing a live check. It looks like you are good to proceed. So go ahead and finish your renewal. Now, it won't stop them either way, whether they're using it or not. It'll just be a helpful tool that people can get that confirmation that, at least as far as CE Broker can tell, they should be able to move forward. We're not quite there. We've been trying to work with our current licensing vendor, and we haven't been able to implement that as an API. But we are hopeful when we move to the new system here in about a year and a half, we'll have that built into the system so people can use CE Broker in some additional ways. So.
Okay, great.
In terms of some other operations items, we are continuing to process licenses as quickly as possible. It is kind of a busy season sometimes in the summer as people are graduating and applying for licensure, but our staff is working really hard and really been impressed with the work they're doing this summer. We also have just recently wrapped up the surveys for all the licensed professions, and social work just closed just a few weeks ago. So we do have a draft version of the survey report. We'll walk through that with you today at the meeting, but really happy with the level of feedback we got from individuals. We were able to get a lot of responses, and so we're really happy that people did volunteer their time to take the survey, and then also that they were so generous in giving us a lot of really helpful feedback. In terms of some legislative updates, I did want to make you aware of a committee that met during the interim. The legislature generally meets for the first few months of the year to handle the hearings and passage of bills and review of agency budgets. But when the session is over, the legislature still holds meetings in the interim. And one of the committee meetings that met recently was a House Select Committee that dealt with social services. And it did a review of the operations of the Board of Nursing. And this committee looked at performance measures for the Board of Nursing, but then also looked at a couple of disciplinary cases that they had gone through. And these cases were discussed in that meeting in front of the legislature publicly. So I just kind of wanted to make you aware of some of the conversations that are happening at the Capitol. Two of the issues involved with those disciplinary cases that the people talked about at that meeting involve situations to where someone's professional license expired. And then there was at least a question of whether the person provided professional services or practice after their license had expired. But the committee went into a few different topics related to that. There was a discussion about, is it unprofessional conduct for someone to allow their license to expire? There were some questions about licensure renewals, reinstatements, what regulatory boards are doing to help people be mindful of their expiration dates, what kind of services people would be offering, and then also a look into the disciplinary processes for state agencies. So we had been asked to provide some information relating to some of the things that we do here. And one of the ways that we help people with their expiration is we provide an email update at about 90 days out, 60 days out, and then 30 days out before a license expires. But then if someone does allow their license to expire, we provide them with a letter that says your license is now expired. One thing that we also clarify with people is that it's not unprofessional conduct for a BSRB license to expire. It really kind of comes down to what you do after the license expires, because it's very important as a public protection mission of the board that individuals are not out there providing professional services that would fall under the scope of practice of someone needing a professional license. So it's not a matter of someone allowing their license to expire. The issue would be if they are providing services without a license. And that's as relevant for people who've never been licensed as it is for people who previously were licensed. And part of that is because in terms of some of the reimbursements and eligibility for things like, multi-state compacts and things like that, you are holding forward to the public or to insurance panels that you hold an active license. And so some of that can get into the area of things like fraud. And so that's why agencies, have a good active system of making sure they can see who's licensed and who's not. On our website, there's a license verification portal where people can log in and see if someone holds an active license. So I just kind of want to make you aware of that committee that had those discussions. We are definitely listening, and we want to be in compliance with anything the legislature is focusing on. So we will be examining our current practices, but there was a nice compliment that was made by a licensee for the Board of Nursing at that meeting, she's also licensed under one of our professions as well, and she complimented our reminders for her license when it would become expired. So we can always look to do improvements, and we want to do that, but just kind of wanted to highlight that meeting for you all. And then if you have any questions about that or anything related to that, maybe I'll pause here for a second and see if you have any questions about that or any other legislative items before I go on to the board updates.
I think when we talked about this yesterday, I think we can expect that the legislature will be looking at our agency as well as other regulatory agencies around these same issues.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair to say. I mean, I think, there were some questions, and I think when you have similar agencies that are using different processes, I think for members of the legislature, it's reasonable for them to ask, why these agencies have different processes. Now, that's probably because they were set up by different individuals who worked through this and came to different conclusions. But standardization, if we're looking at the best practices, that's never a bad thing to look at. So I think, I said we were asked for some information in terms of our renewal process reinstatement. And so it's possible the legislature might take a look at taking some sort of action in the spring as far as standardizing practices, or they might just want to collect additional information. But, they definitely want to make sure that members of the public are protected in the same way that we do. It's just their focus is a little bit different. And so, like I said, we're listening to these types of meetings. We're always looking to make adjustments and improvements in our processes, but just kind of wanted to make you aware of that, as the focus was on another agency, but the agency is similar to the BSRB in some ways. Mm-hmm. Well, if there's no questions on legislative items, I'll move last to items from the most recent board meeting. The board is doing a lot of work on the review of unprofessional conduct regulations right now. If you haven't had the opportunity to watch a recent board meeting, one of the items the board is working on comes from the work of the 7 advisory committees that assist the work of the board. You all spent a lot of time reviewing your unprofessional conduct regulations, making recommendations for changes, and those were forwarded to the board for review and consideration. And the other advisory committees did the same. BSRB staff put all of those things together into a giant grid. And so on the BSRB website, under the materials for those board meetings, you can actually see a giant Excel sheet which has similar items for all 7 professions side by side, so you can see the language. And the board is working through each item, having discussion about should the language be standardized between professions, or is there a reason why there should be different language for one profession versus the other? And that may relate to scope of practice or input from national associations or things like that. But I think in general, if there's not a compelling reason not to, I think the board is looking to standardize practices for unprofessional conduct. And then also legal counsel is weighing in to make sure that our language is clear and doesn't have any kind of vagueness, and that people will have a good understanding of what their expectations are for unprofessional conduct. So that's a big item the board is working through. I think based on the number of items that are in that grid, probably the board may be looking to finish that by the end of the calendar year between the different board meetings. The board is also meeting at an out-of-town planning meeting. This is a once a year meeting the board holds in person, and that is going to be in Manhattan, and that is going to be on Monday, September 29th. So that'll be an all-day meeting for the board. The board will get a chance to work through some of those items there and look at other legislative items and other items potentially that would need more discussion. And then another big takeaway from the board meeting, in the past, the BSRB has not required a background check for licensure, but the board did get that authority if they were to make that a requirement. In the statutes that was passed a few years back. But I know that with the current pressures of workforce and not wanting to have any additional fees on licensees unless it was really necessary, the board has had an ongoing conversation about whether or not to require background checks. But over the last few years, Kansas has passed legislation to add several of our professions to multi-state compacts. In 21, there was legislation to add Kansas to the SIPAC compact for licensed psychologists, and that compact is operational. There was also a bill that passed in the 23 legislative session that added Kansas to a professional counseling multi-state compact. And then in 24, a bill passed to add Kansas to the social work multi-state compact. Professional counseling and social work are not yet live, but they are getting close for professional counseling. I would guess about a year for social work. And the requirements in each of the compacts do require background checks. So this is a standard as it relates to practicing under the multi-state compacts. And when you look at the license requirements in surrounding states, background checks are the standard. And so we had a discussion with the board, and the board did agree to begin the process of requiring background checks for new applications for licensure, but also for reinstatements, and then for our student temporary addiction counselors. And also to allow individuals a process to opt in for the background checks. That way, if individuals need to have passed that as a requirement for licensure, there would be a way for them to do that and then be eligible for the compacts. So we have met with KBI after the board meeting. We're working through the logistics on how that will be accomplished. The fee for the background check is around $57. And that fee would entirely go to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. So there's no amount that would go to BSRB operations. It would just be a pass-through amount. But there would be some training that KBI would offer our employees, be able to do the background check, and then also make sure that we're handling that information appropriately. So there's a few steps to get to the finish line here, but I think sometime this fall, I'm hopeful we'll have a date for when that will go live for new applicants. And then for existing applicants, we're going to try to put out some information on how they can opt into that. So I just wanted to make you aware of that item from the most recent board meeting that was last month. So I'll go ahead and end my report here and see if there's any questions on the items that I talked about or anything else.
Sounds like you were pretty clear. So,
well, if there's any questions, I'll turn it back over to you, Cynthia.
well, I was just going to turn it back to you for updates on the social work multi-state compact to see where we are on that.
Yes, thank you. So I am the commissioner for the multi-state compact for Kansas for social work. And I did begin originally as the compact commissioner for the SIPAC compact when we joined that. And then after serving in that role for a few years, that role has now moved to Richard. And
You just froze, David.
While he's getting back on, Robin, welcome.
Thank you. Was just running late a few minutes.
Glad you could make it.
can you all?
There you.
Okay, sorry, was the screen freeze for a second?
Yes.
Okay. Well, just wanted to make sure that you heard I volunteer on a couple of the committees for the compact. There is information in your packet. I tried to include a few items that you can take a look at in terms of the work of the compact commission. There is a map that I included in your packet of material that shows all of the states that have enacted legislation, and I think that total is somewhere around 30 or 32. There's also a number of states where there's compact legislation pending. And then I think one compact state where they made some changes to the legislation that maybe went above what is allowed. So in general, when you have a multi-state compact, the legislation has to be passed in the same, the language can't really be altered. You can add small things to it if they are separate provisions, but you're really, that's a very fine line. And so so it looks like Georgia or maybe South Carolina had added, South Carolina added something that's under review from the Compact Commission. So they may need to go in there and modify that or not. But there's the map that shows all the current members as of today's date. Also, I wanted to highlight the Compact Commission website. That's a good place for updates as well. It's at swcompact.org. And so you can get more information at that website. Eventually, that will be changing to a .gov website. But I think there's a couple things that'll need to be resolved first. And then I also included a document that talked a little bit about the social work compact implementation timeline. So this was a brand new compact. And when Kansas passed the legislation, we were actually the 7th state to enact the legislation. And that was the minimum threshold to allow the Compact Commission to start to meet. And so when you have these compacts go through legislation, there's a minimum number of states that have to pass it. And once that happens, then you can start to have states identify who would be a compact commissioner. And then you would have the commission start to meet, pass things like bylaws, and then figure out a rulemaking process, and then start to figure out some of the other logistics, like how the compact will be funded, what kind of data system you're going to use for the information. And so that's kind of where we're at. The compact has passed now, and like I said, close to around 30 states. The commission has been set up. There has been, I believe, 2 compact full meetings so far. One in-person meeting that was done earlier this spring in Lexington, Kentucky, at the headquarters of the National Conference for State Governments, in CSL, no, CSG, the Council for State Governments. And so that did take place. Where we're at right now is that the committees are working through the logistics of how the compact will be operational once it goes live. So there's a question of how the compact will be funded currently. The main financing for the commission is through some grants, HRSA grants that have been pulled down by the Association of Social Work Boards, ASWB, and then also working with partners like NASW, and some of the other national associations that were helpful in terms of writing the original language for the multi-state compact legislation. So one of the things that I have been working on in terms of my role on the finance committee is looking at whether there should be a charge when someone participates in the compact through getting a multi-state license, or whether there is a way that it would make sense for there to be just a flat rate per state. That's kind of what the Board of Nursing does for their multi-state compact. A lot of the other compacts, they sort of pass along the cost to the individuals participating in the compact. So that issue is a little bit unresolved. Another item that is being resolved is looking at the rules of the compact. So I mentioned I'm on the rules committee. One of the items that is out for comment right now is a rule to identify the national exam that would be suitable under the language of the compact. So the compact does require that an individual passes a national examination for the levels of licensing that are eligible under the compact, which would be the bachelor's, the master's, and the clinical level. And so there is a rule out there identifying the national examination from ASWB currently. And there was a little bit of a discussion about whether or not the advanced generalist should count for the clinical level. There's a couple states, I think Ohio is one of them, that has the advanced generalist satisfy the clinical eligibility requirement, but the vast majority of states do not allow that. So in the discussion, it was considered that master's or advanced generalist would satisfy the master's level requirement for the exam, but the clinical test would be required for the clinical level of identifying that exam. So you're welcome to take a look at the draft language for that rule that is out there. I just kind of wanted to provide some information on that too. I also provided to you a list of the individuals that currently serve on the different committees. There is an executive committee that's made up of representatives of different states. There's also, as I mentioned, the rules committee, the finance committee. There's also some information about the rulemaking process. And if any individuals want to provide comment, the deadline for the comment on the current item that is out there is, let's see, I think it says written comments on a proposed rule must be submitted by 2 p.m. the day before the meeting, and the next meeting of the Compact Commission is September 4th. So just check the website and probably go ahead and submit that. I would say, based on this language, no later than 2 p.m. Eastern on September 3rd. And then I included the draft rule for your review, so you can take a look at that as well. And if any individuals want to provide public comments, feel free to do so on the website that I identified for the Compact Commission. So in the past, I've kind of given shorter updates on the Compact Commission, but I know at a previous meeting, some individuals were asking for a little bit more detail in terms of the work of the commission. So I just kind of wanted to provide a little bit of a framework of who's meeting and who's discussing some of these items. I think I mentioned this earlier. The estimated timeline at this point for the Compact to go live is probably about a year from now. And the big reason for that is because a decision has not been made yet on which data system to use to keep track of everybody who would have a multi-state license. So this Compact is designed for people, for different states to be able to continue to issue the single state licenses and also to have the ability to issue a multi-state license, which would allow you to practice in all of their compact states. And so there needs to be a way to keep track of anybody who has a multi-state license. Otherwise, if you were to receive services from a social worker in Kansas and you went to our website and they were not someone who had a Kansas license, you would think this person's practicing without a license. So there needs to be a place where we can keep track of everybody who holds a multi-state license, and the time on that needs to be linked to the state issuing that multi-state license. So that state needs to have something in place, but then also there needs to be a data system of shared data, and we need to have that built and then tested, and so that individuals can be able to check that. So that process is not short and it's not cheap either. So the funding for that will need to be worked out as well. Any questions from any of you on the social work multi-state compact, or anything you'd like me to get some information and bring back for a future meeting if you have questions on something else?
I have a couple questions. I believe my memory is from the presentation by the Council of State Governments that
Yes.
that came up with the compact language, that if you have a compact license, social work compact license, and you have any kind of disciplinary action in your home state, that would be information would be on this central database for those with multi-state licenses. Is that correct?
Yes. There is a component that deals with eligibility, that deals with disciplinary violations. It is not a 100% disqualifier if you have discipline on your record. I believe that
I was talking about after you already get your social work compact license. If
Okay.
you subsequently then have disciplinary action, it will be in that central database as well as in your home state?
That's a good question. Let me check on that, because there are a couple of differences in terms of who's investigating it and who has a finding of discipline. Because let's say, for example, someone is doing telehealth from one state into the other. The state where they have their home license, if there's a finding of a violation there that would be severe enough for them to lose their multi-state privileges, that is something that would happen based on the jurisdiction of the home state. If someone was practicing into a remote state and there was a finding of a violation into the remote state, I believe the limitation could potentially be that the person couldn't practice into that remote state anymore but I don't think it would be something that would restrict their ability to hold a multi-state license. I think it would just say you can no longer practice into that state. But in terms of whether the data system will show the discipline or who came to the conclusion of the discipline, let me look into that a little bit more.
Okay. And the other question is about jurisprudence. So I believe I remember that there will be an obligation to be, if you get a multi-state license, that you are familiar with the jurisprudence, what the rules are in each state that you practice into. Is there going to be some kind of mechanism for multi-state license holders to demonstrate that they have knowledge of the jurisprudence in all 30 some states, or whichever states they're actually going to practice into? Or is that going to be just something that you're held responsible for, but there's not going to be any mechanism to prove that you've actually, unless you violate something, and then maybe they would check and see if you had done any training or.
And that's a great question. So I don't think that has been fully resolved yet. So for the professional counseling compact, when you register in their system for a privilege, it will let you know this state requires a jurisprudence exam or this state does not. And so at that point, with their compact, you get individual privileges. So that's something that has to be resolved and when you're in the process of getting a privilege. For social work, the way it's been described would really be opening up and letting someone practice into all of their compact states. And so in terms of verifying that someone has met the jurisprudence requirements or even eligibility to take those jurisprudence examinations, I don't think that they have really worked through how that's going to work. But I will ask some questions about that because that is something that is definitely important. And I do know would be a requirement if a state does require a jurisprudence exam that someone would have to take that before practicing into that state. So I'll get some information. Maybe I'll kind of hear, has there been discussion on that, how they're going to work through that, and then I'll report back on that.
Well, with a central database, might it be possible that the jurisprudence rules in each state that's a member of the compact would be posted and available in that central database for practitioners to access?
Yeah, and I think an easy thing that could be posted would be which states require jurisprudence in some level. I think what's more challenging is maybe how individuals who have a multi-state license could get access to that, and it could hold out to the public that they have passed that. And I think for some states that require jurisprudence, it's a one-time thing. For other ones, it's every so often. And so that would need to be something that would be worked through as well. So,
okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments about social work multi-state compact? It's been long in the works, so I'm excited to see it come to fruition, even though we're still looking at another year probably. Next item on the agenda, we're into old business, and this is pretty old business because we started this a couple of years ago. Eric and I believe Robin initially worked on our little work group to revise and add to the guidelines for clinical social work supervision. There had been a team that had put together a basic outline that mostly covered what's in the regulations for supervision. But our little work group felt like we wanted to expand that and give some actual clear examples of what should be covered in a supervision contract, how you document as you go through supervision, and also make sure that the process from start to finish was crystal clear. And in trying to make sure we included everything and that we addressed some of the pitfalls that people have when they go to get their clinical license and there's been some issue with their supervision. We consulted with Leslie and Tyla, and we also ran it by Tim, our attorney, because we wanted to make sure that we weren't putting anything in there that wasn't legally correct. And so this document has passed through all of those reviews and their hands. And so what you have that was given last, I don't think, did you include it this time? Did you
Yes,
attach it this time, David? Okay, all right. So
Yes, it's in the packet of materials.
it was included in with a packet for our last meeting, but we didn't have time to really review it. So I'm hoping that most of you had time to look at that between last month and now. And I would just invite any comments, questions, concerns about anything that you see in this document now.
And Cynthia, I just want to recognize a couple of my staff members who are present now as well. So Leslie Allen, the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager, and Leslie had worked on the original version of the supervision manual several years in the past with other members of the board. And Tyla Wadsworth is also here, and she's one of our licensing specialists. She helps a ton of people with their clinical training plans when they're submitting those and helping them work through that as they pursue clinical level licensure. So they are both here in attendance as well. And I know Tyler's done a lot of work on the supervision manual, and they are here available to you as well. So if you have questions, they are here. And if they have comments, I want to give them the opportunity to share their comments as well if they have any comments for the advisory committee.
Yes, they provided very valuable information about the kinds of glitches that they see when people apply and have not satisfied all the requirements of their clinical supervision. And of course, as we consider regulations and some of the maybe some of the complaints even, part of our issue was that the supervisee didn't always know what supervision was supposed to look like and what the supervisor was supposed to be providing. You know, like one of the most basic things is documentation of every session and what was discussed in that meeting. And for both the supervisee and the supervisor to keep that log and reconcile it, sign off on it every time, because we have a number of times had people who come up to get their clinical license, and either they've had a couple of different supervisors and they can't find the one that the first one, and they can't provide the documentation that they need. So that's just one example of the glitches that happen when people come up to apply for their clinical license and they weren't aware or had not appropriately satisfied all of the requirements of supervision. Leslie or Tyla, do you have any particular comments or thoughts about the clinical supervision guidelines, which we were directed to call them guidelines because we don't want it to be like we put in sample forms in there, but they're not required. We don't want to give them the weight of law.
No, I like the additional information. I think it'll be helpful.
I agree.
Eric, do you have anything to add, since it's been a while since we actually went through all this and worked on it?
Not really. It just looks a lot prettier than what we submitted to them. So thank you for all
Yes.
the other committees that, refined and fine tuned the very ugly document that we forwarded to you.
Yes, it's nicely cleaned up. Absolutely. Well, I think that we need to have a motion to adopt this document that would then be published on the website and available to anyone who wanted to either be a supervisor or a supervisee. So
I just want to say I'm working on my clinical license right now, and this would have been helpful when I was applying for it. So I think
good.
it's wonderful.
Good. I'm glad. And I was going to ask also, how many of us do supervision? Does anyone? Annis does, Eric does. Yeah. So, but great to hear that, because that was totally the intent, that it would prevent some of supervisor errors that we see, and also let supervisees have a clearer picture of exactly what they needed to be doing during their supervision hours. So, and some specific examples of like what topics might be covered in supervision, because we've heard from some supervisees that they weren't necessarily getting the level of training or instruction or guidance in their supervisory meetings that they should have been. So we wanted to clarify that too. So do I have a motion to adopt this document as you
I'll move
modify?
it.
Pardon me?
I will move.
Thank you, Annis. Do I
This
have-
is Leanne, I second it.
Great, thank you. And Eric seconded it too, so we have a third. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone?
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign? Okay, great. Thank you very much. And Leslie, you'll get that put on the website for us eventually here.
Yes, I'll ask Ashley to put it up today.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, we also we've had an ongoing topic of discussing artificial intelligence, with an eye towards at some point maybe having an idea of what kinds of regulation might be useful, helpful, important. There was an attempt in the recent bill that was passed to prohibit regulation of artificial intelligence at the federal level. It would have prohibited all states for 10 years from regulating AI. Fortunately, that provision was struck in the Senate version that eventually passed. And so that is not the case right now. However, I won't be surprised if there's another attempt to create a prohibition against regulating AI. At the moment, though, all states are free to do that. We haven't come up with clear recommendations or suggestions at this point, but it is a discussion that we want to continue. We've shared a number of different articles and CE events, and I encourage all of you to access any kind of education about AI that you might be able to find, because it's not going away. And how many people here use any kind of AI in your practice? How do you use it? Is it ChatGPT or what do you use?
We have a system here called Elios at Burt Nash that helps with notes. And then
note-taking.
it's on almost every third-party platform I use for telehealth.
And that and also for notes or for summary?
For notes, yeah.
Yeah. And I've noticed that with medical appointments that almost always now they state that they're using AI to summarize your notes. Eric, how do you use it?
I use it with note taking and the electronic health record. Most of our doctors at the local clinics are also using a version of AI for all their notes. And then just a sort of a point of fact, you can't even hardly use things like Adobe for consents or sign documents or even Word, Google, etc., without having some kind of AI powered assistant. So virtually everything's AI at this point. And like you said, it's not going away, but I definitely think people need to educate themselves in any way possible.
As you have used it for notes, we've talked about this before, the need to go back and check what AI said, and are you finding it to be pretty accurate? How often are you having to correct? How often is the AI missing the nuance of, a therapeutic interaction? What are you finding, those of you that are using it for that purpose?
So I was going to say nuance and subtlety, it doesn't necessarily pick up. Like if you're wanting it to pick up every single, characteristic of the session, it doesn't. What it does an amazing job is picking out particular skills utilized or particular topics that for like billing purposes that need to be covered, that kind of thing. It does an amazing job of that. So as far as a very specific, what I would consider a work product note, it doesn't do that well. What it does incredibly is take the highlights and assign like skills or modalities, et cetera, that you utilized in a way that makes them really pretty good notes.
So in other words, it would identify you're using cognitive behavioral strategies or that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And
Well, and you can go in when if you're writing a note, you can say, I did a session with a 9-year-old client. This is what we discussed. This is what I used during our session. Write me a note, and it will make
create
a
it out of
pretty,
what you,
yes,
rather than listening to the session,
yes,
listening, and it creates
yes,
it out of what you say.
right.
Is that how yours works too, Eric? Or you
We have
haven't
the option.
listened into the
There's the
session?
option of do it. There's the option to do it both ways. You can go back and have AI do it after the fact, or you can record it and then all telehealth that I use, it just records it live and comes out like it's hard to even shut it off at this point.
Mhm. It also
So
makes it hard to remember how to write a note from scratch.
yeah,
Every once
right.
in a while I have to do that and uh-oh. Yes.
So one of the things when I was at the ASWB conference a while back, they were talking about informed consent for clients about the use of AI. Is that incorporated into your informed consent with and do you have have any of your clients objected
I
to
haven't
having
had
their
a
session
client.
recorded by a machine and then summarized by a machine?
So mine, I've had no objections and I do put it in a consent. I have a specific one for audio recording because it does use audio recordings, but I also have a consent embedded in with like my bigger consent about the use of AI. It's pretty meaty, pretty minimal, but and then I usually go over it because I do like the one I use, my cell phone is like the recorder. So like I stick it on the table and I give an explanation before I do it to get verbal consent as well.
Mm.
Well, I think this is part of the reason that whenever something is figured out, it'll be helpful because there aren't any guidelines at this point. And so it's like, okay, is it okay? Do you have to say something to your client that you are using this tool to write your note? Or like so it's very gray. And so it's hard to know.
Mhm.
And I would personally like some regulations because there is a level at times of guilt of like it's not your own work.
Right.
And so I do feel some aspects of that. When I even use it to type a note and take 10 minutes out of I could take 10 minutes out of my day to write a note, but it takes 2 to put it in there and copy it and paste. And so
Mhm.
what I was going to say was I use Claude. My school district put on a informative AI in service for us, and so we learned a lot about the different platforms and basically how AI works. So we use Claude. Also because I'm in a school setting, I use Magic School. I'm the 504 coordinator at my school, and so I use it to help with some drafting 504s. So that's what I use mine for. And then just in private practice, I use it for writing my notes.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is you're entering data about a client into a system that, and if you're recording it on your phone, you can theoretically erase it, but we all know that things can be retrieved. And so it seems to me that, they're at minimum, you have to inform people of that information about them and their session, their diagnosis, their treatment is being entered into some kind of database that, could be accessed by
Well,
other folks that aren't part of their team.
that's actually part of that was a big question when we implemented it at Burt Nash, and the system we're using, it's called Elios. It isn't actually a recording and the information doesn't live anywhere after the note has been generated. And they went to pretty great lengths to kind of show us how that happened and what that is, but I don't know that that's true across the board. I do think that's a really important question is it recorded? If so, where does it go? How are they compliant with HIPAA? How can they assure that there isn't someone's data living off-site somewhere that they haven't agreed to? So,
Well, the first thing that gets subpoenaed in many court cases is people's devices, and you hear regularly about things that they thought were erased and didn't exist anywhere that were retrieved. So,
Yeah.
I, I would be skeptical about
Sure.
that information that like that being stored or being entered anywhere, because once it's entered, I'm not sure how certain anybody can be that it's truly not there anymore or not retrievable anymore.
Yeah,
Another
that
thing I
is-
was
Say-
recently taught. Sorry, you can go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say my system's very similar to Anna's in that once the node is authored, it deletes it automatically, but it also deletes it after 24 hours. But some of the discussion we had with some of the people I spoke with is like even the security of the network. Because it is being transcribed wirelessly. So, VPNs, adequate security around network connectivity, et cetera. So it's not just the AI that you have to worry about. You have to also worry about your Wi-Fi or your internet signal or the security of your laptop, et cetera. So it's not just something, oh, hey, I bought this and it's going to work. You really do have to support it with quite a bit of information to be able to truly consider that data adequately secured.
Yeah, it seems like that dealing with uh, AI and telehealth, et cetera, should be a part of professional education, even
Absolutely.
in the universities at this point, because nobody's going to come out of school today and not be using it
Right.
in some whatever, even with the wide variety of settings that social workers work in. I think they're going to see it's going to be everywhere. Did you have another
Well,
point,
a,
Callie?
a concern of mine is that people will use it to potentially, you know, not just help with productivity, but help with the actual work that we do. Like, we are educated to diagnose and treat people. And if people are using AI to do the diagnosis for them or come up with what they should do for them, that is a huge concern because that's not a real, I mean, I don't know. It's just concerning for me. I've heard about doctors
Yeah, that's happening very
graduating
much in the medical
using
field. Yeah.
AI, and that's concerning as a helping profession. Um, and I think we have a due diligence to be educated ourselves and not use this device to do what we are supposed to be doing as people. So
Well,
it's
mental health diagnosis is not the same as does this bacteria exist in this person's
sure.
body? And
Well,
if it does, then they have this disease,
sure.
There's more of an art to it and in the medical field where, it's being framed as this is a way to confirm the doctor's diagnosis.
Sure.
But there's the risk, of course, of people just letting AI decide for them and not doing the review or not using their own skills. And that would certainly be the case for us as clinicians.
Well, and I've used it as a very helpful tool. I've been a supervisor of students, and when you're like, type me up a summary of a kid with generalized anxiety so that my student can diagnose this. And so when you're using it in that aspect, I feel like, sure, I could write a little synopsis of whatever this person. But again, I'm using that for productivity. And because I already know about generalized anxiety and how to treat that, where the student does it. And so I feel like I use it very ethically, where maybe it's just not everybody is going to have the same reference of using it that I am. And so I hope that there can be some kind of regulation around it, because when you're working with people, it can get pretty tricky and kind of scary sometimes.
Well, if any of you become aware of educational opportunities or texts or as in books, not this kind of text, and or information that proposes some specific regulations. I haven't. The only thing I've seen is a sample informed consent, which I will ask David to send out to you all. It was one that was. I don't know if you have a copy of it, David. It was from the ASDWB conference, but I'll shoot it to you. But you know, for us to even know what to advocate for, or to have some sample regulations that we might propose would be really important. I feel like it's so far ahead of us, you know, and because of the possibility that there's going to be an attempt to prohibit regulation, I feel some urgency for us to sort of get at least some kind of basic understanding and idea about regulations that could prevent some of the harms that we can identify.
Well, one thing I've seen across different platforms in different places is some form of putting your professional fingerprint on the note. So either checking a box that says I have reviewed this and verify that, you know, I've done so with my clinical eye, or there are some platforms that will require you to make some edits. You can't just accept it as is. So some way of, from a professional standpoint, saying you have used your skills and approved what it's written.
And so if there was a regulation that required that, that would be an example of something that
might be a professional standard we would investigate if somebody wasn't doing that.
Yeah. Or it be a requirement for the platform. And the platform that is used has to have that feature or similar. Okay, any other thoughts at the moment about AI or any other resources that you know of, or if you come across any in between our meetings, please email me or David or Andrea. Yes, Eric.
He was doing one this Thursday, actually. David sent it out, I think, to the group a little while back. They said that it's over, like they have so many people that are attending it that they have actually asked people if they want to, or if their plans have changed, to please drop off. So it is a particularly hot topic, and like lots of people are educating themselves on it. So just be aware of that.
Yeah, David did send that last month or a couple months.
On the flip side, sorry, Cynthia, I know we're talking about from the provider perspective, but I mean, more and more clients are using AI to go to therapy, to utilize as therapy tools, and clinicians. And I think that'll be interesting to see as that plays out more.
Yeah, I've seen some research pieces about testing AI therapists. And
well, I have a client that paid for a bot, and it does a pretty decent job of using therapeutic interventions. And, you know, there's lots of things out there that provide suggestions that are like apps that you can use. So it is getting closer and closer to, you know, a robot, you being able to text a bot or talk to a bot, and it gives some kind of legitimate therapeutic response. So it's coming fast.
A therapist in your pocket. Yeah. Well, and I mean, any of us have had in between session contact with clients when there was a crisis or whatever was going on. And so some of those tools certainly they could replace what we think of as real therapy, but they could also be an extension of our therapeutic interventions. So finding the ways that we can use AI to support and enhance what we provide, I think is the challenge, rather than just trying to, you know, keep it to the side because there could be the possibility of it replacing live therapists. Okay, well, I think we need to move on to new business. And we have a review and discussion on the draft survey report of licensees. And we did have about 2,000 social work responses to the survey. So that was a really good, robust sample. I was happy to hear that, David.
Thank you, Cynthia. And I'll go ahead and I'll pull up a copy of the draft report. We did just close the survey recently, so we really have pushed the staff hard and asked them to do quite a lot to help in terms of summarizing a lot of the responses, as Cynthia said. We had 2,000 social workers who completed the survey, so that was about 23% response rate. And so really happy to see that. You know, this is really good information and really helpful information. And we wanted to collect information concerning workforce to answer certain questions. And then also, there were a number of topics that we wanted to ask licensees about, any issues they're seeing in the field, items related to things like supervision, artificial intelligence, telehealth, and ways in which we can protect the public better as a licensing agency as well. So I want to give a huge thank you to Tyla and also my assistant, Emma Allen. They have done a lot of work on the summary information for this draft report. This is a draft we will add to this. So you'll see some markings where there will be a little bit of more information to come. But I wanted to rush this to get it to you today so we could walk through it together. So keep in mind, it is a draft. We'll walk through about as much as we can today. And if you have taken a look at the report, you may see that the report itself is 175 pages. And I realize that that is extremely intimidating. We organized the report a little differently this time around. So we have done 2 previous surveys of social workers in the last few years. And for this, we wanted to go ahead and include summary information first, but we also wanted to preserve the voices of the people who responded to the survey questions. And so while it is helpful to summarize information, we wanted to make sure that you could get an impression of the people who responded. And so as much as possible, we did try to keep those individual responses to open field questions as appendices on the back of the report. So about the first 35 pages is explanation and summary information, but for individuals who wanted to do a deeper dive, that information is there. So I will share my screen and we can walk through the report together. And I will stop about 5 minutes before we get to the end of the meeting to see if there's any questions today. We can revisit this, and I have a plan for how we can kind of divide and conquer some of these questions to get a little bit more focus on some of these issues, but I wanted to provide you some high-level information today. So I'll share my screen here. Okay, you should see a copy of the report itself. Primarily, the responses came through from about June 17th through about mid-July in terms of the information. At the beginning of the report, we just include some summary information explaining to people outside of Kansas, if they're reviewing this report, that we have 4 levels of permanent licensure for the social work profession. That does include the associate level social work license, and we only have 4 individuals in that category currently. And we did not include that as a breakout group for the survey, primarily because with that few of licensees, we were concerned about being able to preserve the confidential nature of the survey responses. But basically, we have our LBSWs, we have our LMSWs, and our LSCSWs. And so, as I mentioned, this is a draft report, but we wanted to go ahead and kind of explain our levels of licensing for social work, that we did work with the advisory committees to put together questions. And then the survey responses came in June and July of 2025. Total number of licensees at the time that we were doing this was about 8,624 for the social work profession. And then we had the breakout there in terms of how many licensees per group. Ultimately, overall, 31 days the survey was open for responses. There were about 2,000 social workers who completed the survey for an overall response rate of about 23.2%. For LBSWs, there was 174 individuals who completed the survey for a response rate of about 15.5%. For the LMSW level of license, 862 individuals completed the survey for a response rate of 20.1%. And then for our clinical level of license, the LSCSWs, about 964 individuals completed the survey for a response rate of about 28.8%. And so then there's a note just to kind of explain what I had mentioned previously. The first 35 pages or so go through a high-level review and summary information but for individuals who want to see the additional responses, that information is attached as appendices. We are missing a couple on this version of the draft report, so in a future version, we will have a little bit more information, but we had as many of them as we could attach at this time. Going to the first question, question 1, we asked all levels of licensing, the LBSWs, LMSWs, and LSCSWs, do you primarily work in public practice, private practice, an educational setting, or another setting? For the LBSWs, the biggest number, 50.6%, it mentioned that they work in public practice. And then about the next highest group, about 40%, mentioned they work in another setting. And then very few work in private practice or in an educational setting. For LMSWs, 862 LMSWs answered the question. The largest group of respondents, about 35%, noted they work in public practice. Then the next highest number, about 27%, mentioned another setting. And then one of the highest categories was educational setting, with about 25% of LMSWs reporting they work in an educational setting. And then 110 individuals reported private practice, so about 12.8% for the LMSWs. For the LSCSWs, 964 individuals answered the question. The largest number of respondents mentioned they work in private practice, so there is a little bit of a flip when you get to the level of clinical license. Private practice is about half of our LSCSWs, and then public practice makes up about a quarter, or 26%. And then about 13.7% mentioned working in another setting, and then roughly close to 10% in an educational setting. Next question we asked, all levels of licensing, how many years have you practiced as a social worker between Kansas and other states? The number one response, which was for LBSWs, about 82% responded they've practiced for over 10 years. The next highest level was practicing over 5 years, but less than 10 years at about 8%. And then all of their responses were less than 5%. For the LMSWs, the largest group of respondents was still practicing over 10 years, but a much smaller percentage, 55% roughly for the LMSWs. And then the next highest after that was over 2 years, but less than 5 years, but that was very similar to the number for over 5 years, but less than 10 years. And then the number who had practiced fewer than that, lower than 6%. For the LSCSW, the most common answer was practicing over 10 years, and that made up about 78% of licensed respondents. And then the next highest was individuals who practiced over 5 years, but less than 10 years, with about 18%. And all other categories made up fewer than 5%. And so I thought that was really interesting to look at the numbers comparing the LBSWs, the LSCSWs to the LMSWs. Question 3, we said, do you maintain an active license but no longer work as a social worker? We had heard that there are some individuals who may maintain their license but not actively provide services, and we wanted to better understand that. So for the LBSWs, there were responses from about, 107 LBSWs who answered the question, and 65 respondents mentioned it did not apply to them because they were currently providing services. But for those who mentioned they did hold their license but not provide services currently, the most frequently reported reason was because it was not required in their current job. About 27 respondents mentioned that. While less frequently reported, other reasons included being retired, 7 responses. So individuals may retire before their license expires, and then we generally just say, just wait until your license expires and then discontinue practicing. But if you want to practice again, make sure you reinstate. So about 7 people were caught in that time period between retiring and their license not being expired yet. Then there were individual LBSWs liking to stay up to date on continuing education, 4 responses. Having a different license than they practice under, 3 responses. They had moved out of state, 2 individuals reported that. And then others believe that the pay in the social work field is too low. For LMSW responses, 554 LMSWs answered the question, and our staff did a tremendous job summarizing the 554 responses. 424 individuals said it didn't apply to them because they are still providing services, but for those who do not, the most frequently reported reason was because it's not required for their current job. And then commonly reported jobs including education, administration, director of an organization, school counseling, CEO of a company, or working for the federal government, and also working with policy. The second most frequently reported reason for maintaining an active license but no longer working as a social worker was due to individuals being retired, and there were about 21 LMSWs who fell into that category. While less commonly reported, other reasons included family responsibilities, pay in the social work field being too low, medical or health reasons, burnout, the job being too stressful, live out of state, providing training to social workers, or providing supervision. And I mentioned earlier that there may be some individuals who had retired and maybe waiting for their license to expire. There are also maybe individuals who want to preserve the right to come back a little more easily, so they maintain their license being active. So there are some individuals who may not be currently practicing, but they may keep an active license for that reason too. For LSCSW responses, 510 LSCSWs answered the question. 141 respondents indicated the question did not apply to them because they were still providing services. But for individuals who were not providing services, the most common reason is due to providing services not being required for one's current job, or that they only offer supervision. One of the respondents did, however, note they plan to start providing services again soon. While less frequently identified in the reasons above, other licensees noted they maintain an active license but are considering retiring soon. Other respondents indicated they are currently retiring or currently retired or a stay-at-home parent. Question 4, we asked all levels of licensing in a typical week, how many hours do you provide in-person services to clients? And I do want to preface this in the next couple questions. We were trying to get an understanding of the types of services individuals are providing for the individuals, that are providing services. You'll see a couple of different ways in which people can provide services, but we did want to know in a typical week, how many hours do people provide in-person services to clients? Now, as another note, we did not define the term in-person services to clients. Some people might have interpreted that as one-on-one with the client, interacting with them. But then some other people might say, well, but when you're interacting with clients, there's also a part of the job that would involve the follow-up paperwork or other things related to that. So we didn't say this was only time in front of clients. It was just listed as in-person services. So there was some open to interpretation on this item. But for individuals who answered the question, in a typical week, how many hours do you provide in-person services? We had 173 LBSWs answer the question. The most common response was from 53 individuals who provided a response that was less than 5 hours per week. That was about a third of our LBSWs. So a third of our LBSWs noted providing fewer than 5 hours of in-person services to clients each week. Second most common answer was 43 individuals, or about 25%, who said they provide less than 40 hours, but more than 20 hours. And then there were 35 individuals who provided less than 20, but more than 10. That's about 20%. And then a smaller number of individuals, about 10%, that provided less than 10, but more than 5. And then the responses were less than 7%. For the LMSWs, the most individuals who answered the question, there were about 855. The most common response was from about 40% of respondents who say they work less than 40 hours, or at least provide in-person services fewer than 40 hours, but more than 20 hours per week. And that was followed by the next highest group of respondents, about 22%, that said they provide fewer than 5 hours of services. And then about 20% or 19.4, so they provide less than 20, but more than 10 hours per week. When you're looking at the clinical level of license, the most common response for the 955 individuals who responded to the survey question was about 41% or 42% who said they provide more than 20 hours per week, but less than 40. And that was followed by second most common answer, which was 22 or 23%, which was less than 20 hours, but more than 10 hours. And then the next most common answer, the 20%, was fewer than 5 hours per week. The next question we asked, we wanted to see as far as the shift between in-person services versus remote services or telehealth. In a typical week, how many hours do you provide telehealth or remote services to clients? 173 LBSWs answered the question, The most frequent response, about 70% or so, LBSWs noted providing fewer than 5 hours of remote services per week. And then the next most common answer I thought was interesting is about 13% that preferred not to answer this question. And then all of their responses were under 9%.
No explanation from those that said they preferred not to answer the question?
Unfortunately, this was only a multiple choice. So they were given a few different options there, but no explanation in terms of why they selected prefer not to answer.
Interesting.
LMSW, 850 LMSWs answered the question. The most popular response was about 73% of individuals who responded who said they provide fewer than 5 hours of remote services per week. The next most common was about 9% of individuals who say they provide between 5 to 10 hours of remote services per week. And then for LSCSW responses, 957 individuals answered the question. Most common response from about 54% of respondents was providing less than 5 hours of remote services. However, there were about 20% of individuals who noted providing between 5 to 10 hours of remote services per week. And then about 15 or 16% who said they provide less than 20 hours, but more than 10 hours per week. So it does appear that there is more remote services being provided by the clinical level compared to the other two levels of licensure. Question 6. We asked individuals, are you currently working towards attaining a licensed master's level social work license in Kansas? That was for the bachelor's level. We asked a similar question to the master's level licensees. Are you currently working towards attaining a licensed specialist clinical social work or LSCSW license in Kansas? And then for both groups, if you are not taking steps to receive such a license, please explain why you made that decision. So for the LBSWs, 155 individuals answered the question. 11 respondents indicated they are actively working towards attaining a license at the LMSW level. 4 of the 11 noted that failing to pass the licensing examination is keeping them from getting a license. 6 individuals indicated that they may be open to pursuing LMSW licensure in the future, but are not currently. The most frequently reported reason for not pursuing LMSW licensure concerning schooling. Specifically, it was reported that the required education and other associated licensure fees are too expensive, and that was from 34 respondents. Licensees do not have time to go back to school, 8 responses, and licensees not wanting to go back to school, 7 responses. The second most commonly reported reason for not attaining an LMSW license was due to age or retirement. And then 21 individuals also reported that their current job does not require the master's degree or a master's level license. And then while less frequently reported, other reasons reported included the fact that licensees would not receive a higher salary and that they hold a master's degree in another field. And then for the LMSW responses, this one is just still getting prepared, but 801 LMSWs did answer the question, and we'll have that information available for you in the next version of the draft report. For question 6, we asked the clinical level of license in a typical week, how many hours are you responsible for supervising, managing, and overseeing the work of others? 945, this should say LSCSWs, answered the question. The most common response was from individuals, about 71%, who said they provide fewer than 5 hours per week as far as supervising, managing, and overseeing the work of others. Other responses were all less than 7%. Question 7 for all groups, do you anticipate retiring from the social work profession in the next 5 years? For the LBSWs, 174 individuals answered the question. The most common response was no, at 60%, followed by 36 individuals who answered yes, or about 21%, and then about 18% who mentioned unsure. And I think there's a few different ways to view this type of a question. On one hand, you could look at the number of no responses. On the other hand, you could look at the number of yes responses and consider the total of unsures. And I know 5 years is a long time, but if the number of people that were unsure plus the number of people that were yeses all do retire in the next 5 years, that could create an issue in terms of workforce. And so we thought this could be a helpful way to get an idea between the professions, especially of looking into the future. What type of a change in workforce do we anticipate based on people's responses? For the LMSW responses, 857 individuals answered the question, do you anticipate retiring in the next 5 years? The most common response was no, with about 75%, followed by unsure at 14%, and then 10% said yes. And so a higher number were saying no for the LMSWs compared to the LBSWs. And then for the clinical level, 958 individuals answered question 7. The most common response was 66% of individuals answering no, but that was followed by 17% of individuals answering yes, and then about 16% noting they were unsure. Question 8, we highlighted the work of the advisory committee. We wanted to inform licensees about the work that the board does in terms of utilizing roughly 50 to 60 volunteers that serve on the advisory committees and attend these meetings every other month to assist the work of the board, and that we have an advisory committee set up for each of the 7 professions regulated by the board. We wanted to make sure people were aware that these meetings were being broadcast over the YouTube channel and that they're open for individuals to track and follow. But we also wanted to ask, how familiar are people with the work of the advisory committees? For the LMSWs who answered the question, 174 individuals answered it. The most common response was that 72% were not familiar with the work of the advisory committee, followed by about 15% who mentioned that they were somewhat familiar. And then all their responses were less than 9%. For the LMSWs, 860 LMSWs answered the question. The largest group, about 68%, mentioned they had no familiarity with the advisory committee, but about 19% said they had some familiarity. And then about 10% said they had an average level of familiarity. For the clinical, 960 clinical licensees answered the question. Most common response was about 60% who noted no familiarity with the advisory committee, but 21.5% mentioned they had some familiarity, and then about 12.5% mentioned they had an average level of familiarity. One of the reasons that we did highlight this was to bring it to the attention of our licensees. And while these were just multiple choice, there was no opportunity to provide comments specifically on this question in this space. For other questions, and we did have a catch-all at the end of the survey, some individuals did say they appreciated us highlighting this information, and they were unaware that the board did broadcast meetings on the YouTube channel, and that they appreciated us informing them about this, and that they'll make a point of becoming more informed on the work of the advisory committees, which is great, because we are trying to make an effort to incorporate more people having a part of this discussion, bring in different viewpoints, and so wanted to do some continuous outreach, and part of that was by asking this question on the survey. It may also be interesting if we do a future survey in a few years to maybe ask the same question and then see how we're doing in terms of licensees in the future and their level of awareness with the advisory committee. For question 9, we asked each level of licensing over the past 2 years, based on your observations and experience practicing the social work.
Uh-oh. Looks like David froze again.
Leanne, it looks like it made you the host, so you might have to let David in if you see him in the waiting room.
Now Leslie
Oh.
Allen is the host, so she can let him in.
Okay.
Hello, welcome back.
Hello. Thank you all. Sorry about that. We're having some technical issues recently with some of our computers. We're switching over and we're getting on board with all of the Windows 11. So, but appreciate you all. I will share my screen again, and we can continue to go through the information for the report. Okay, can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. We were talking about the question that asked all levels of licensing, had you seen any practice-related negative issues in the past few years, or areas where individuals appear to need more continuing education training in a certain area? And this was an open field question, so Tyler helped out with some of the summary information on this question and some of the others. So Tyler, feel free to add any kind of input. I'll go through some of the written information, but feel free to weigh in too if you want. For the LBSW responses, 131 LBSWs answered the question, identifying practice-related negative issues. 43 individuals indicated they had experienced no practice-related negative issues or training that needs to be reported on. But for those individuals who did identify certain items, most frequently reported practice-related issues involved unlicensed case managers having no oversight or board to report to. 7 individuals highlighted this. Others reported negative issues included politics in the workplace, burnout, heavy caseloads, understaffing, the belief that CEU requirement is too high and or a financial burden, being a lack of resources, pay in the profession being too low. And then shifting focus to areas where individuals appeared to need more education and training, the more frequently reported was in the area of ethics. These answers related to general ethics as well as on developing ethical guidelines for artificial intelligence and telehealth. And then other frequently reported areas where more information or education was needed and training included interpersonal, people or customer service skills, such as good communication, emotional intelligence, and the ability to provide feedback and engage well. Safety, such as knowing how to appropriately navigate emergency or crisis care, knowing techniques on handling hostility, and being educated on prevention strategies. Boundaries, professionalism, being respectful, taking accountability, having professional writing and grammar skills, trauma, cultural competence, child welfare, bias, appropriate supervision, compassion, empathy, intellectual disabilities, interview skills, self-care, self-determination, substance use, and technology and digital literacy. And you may be asking yourself, what could the BSRB do about some of these topics? Part of this is identifying some of the issues, and then the next step will be sort of an approach. And so some of these may not be under the BSRB jurisdiction, or may not be the most appropriate group to address these at the beginning. But we can start a conversation, and we can share this report with individuals from different programs and other individuals. And if we can't assist with some of these issues, perhaps we can deliver this information so that they can continue the conversation and work on some of these topics as well. For the LMSW, 670 LMSWs answered the question. We will have a summary of their responses at the next meeting. For the clinical level responses, 723 individuals answered the question. 144 respondents indicated having seen no practice-related negative issues. But for the practice-related negative issues, they were broken down into 4 main areas: ethical issues, documentation, insurance, areas needing more education or training, and other issues. Licensees reported the following ethical issues: navigating boundaries with coworkers and supervisors, dual relationships in rural communities, professionalism, burnout, personal bias, quality of care from new graduates, social media, trauma care over telehealth, cultural competency, continuity of care, practicing outside of one's scope of practice, how AI or mental health applications are protecting PHI, political climate, and LMSWs working in private practice. And then also 2-year temporary licenses and reduction in clinical hours. Documentation issues reported centered around the need for more education and or training and documentation used by courts and in private practice. Responders also highlighted that new graduates lack documentation skills. Insurance issues highlighted the difference in navigating insurance and the reimbursement requirements, along with poor reimbursement rates and problems with Medicare and Medicaid. Many responses focused on areas that need more education and training. Frequently reported areas include billing and coding, suicide prevention, business skills, clinical supervisor training, trauma-based care, addiction, autism, ADD and ADHD, telehealth diagnosis, documentation, DEI, domestic and sexual violence, eating disorders, and minorities. Other respondents highlighted communication issues between agencies, a lack of self-awareness among therapists, and an increase in burnout. So lots of good topics to be reviewed and discussed, but wanted to highlight some of this information for you now. Question 10, we asked all levels of licensing over the past 2 years. Have you experienced any issues with telehealth, either through professional practice or observations of other practitioners? Please explain. For the LBSW responses, 133 LBSWs answered the question, identifying a range of issues concerning telehealth. 115 individuals indicated having experienced no negative issues concerning telehealth. However, of this 115, 6 respondents stated they do not provide telehealth. 4 stated that telehealth makes services more accessible, and 3 stated that telehealth is useful under circumstances. The most commonly reported issue concerning telehealth was issue with technology and the internet, 4 responses. Other reported issues included HIPAA and confidentiality that could not be verified. Unlicensed individuals are providing social work services. Telehealth is not fit for children. Children cannot stay engaged. And some providers use digitally or are digitally illiterate. There are also issues specifically related to clients and or sessions. And such issues included telehealth, making it more difficult to connect or build rapport with clients, to engage clients and keep their attention, and in observing body language and nonverbal cues. For the LMSWs, 706 LMSWs answered the question. 578 respondents reported having experienced no negative issues concerning telehealth. After providing this answer, many licensees followed up with additional information. The licensees noted either they do not provide telehealth, telehealth has reduced barriers and increased access to services, telehealth is a great beneficial resource, telehealth is beneficial for rural areas, they love telehealth, telehealth is great for those without transportation, clients love telehealth, they only provide telehealth, or telehealth allows for more expedient services. And there were many issues concerning telehealth frequently identified, with the most frequently reported being Wi-Fi or connectivity or technical issues. Second most commonly reported issue was with clients and other providers not being in private settings for telehealth sessions. Other reported issues included telehealth is harmful or ineffective or unethical with children, confidentiality challenges or concerns, telehealth cannot be provided if the client or provider temporarily goes out of state, telehealth is beneficial or useful in crisis situations and when it is only available option, lack of access to technology, there needs to be more training around telehealth, telehealth is not covered by all insurances, not everyone can connect or relate through a screen, older populations struggle with telehealth, and organizations need to have telehealth policies if utilizing it, but many do not. And audio-only telehealth, the use of AI in telehealth sessions, or questionable platforms being used to conduct telehealth. And 4 respondents also reported having observed telehealth being used inappropriately. Furthermore, it was reported that compared to in-person services, telehealth makes it more difficult to observe body language and nonverbal cues, is impersonal, makes it more difficult to keep clients engaged, is ineffective, increases distractions, produces less accurate assessments, produces less client participation, or can lead to less effective communication. It was also noted that providers need to be more aware of when it is best to shift a client to in-person services. Looks like we're getting close to the end of the meeting. We have about 5 minutes left. So I would encourage you to continue to work through the draft report. Kyla, do you have any comments before we go ahead and talk about next steps for the committee?
Yeah, so me and Emma had just some common things that we saw through all of the levels of licensure that you'll see once you guys go through all of the answers. But it seems like they're just, which you guys are already working on from earlier in this meeting, but there's just needing to be guidelines for AI and telehealth. A lot of people are interested in more information on the multi-state compact and things like that. It looks like there are some things for alternate pathways to licensure. Again, something you guys are already working on. And I think that having more visibility for the advisory committee will give them some more information on what you guys are working on. So there will be less questions about what's going on because they'll be able to watch the committee and see what you guys are actually doing. So.
Great. Well, thanks, Tyler. And again, thank you a lot, Tyler. That was amazing in terms of going through and summarizing hundreds of responses from different people, and Emma as well. They did a lot of work in a very short time period. So really appreciate all of that. And
Thank
as you
you.
work- yes, thank you, Tyler. For the committee, you know, what the other committees are doing is they're focusing on a few questions to have more of an in-depth discussion on for future meetings. So what I would recommend is for the next meeting to go ahead and review the responses to question 10 as it relates to telehealth. We just talked about that a little bit, but also not just summary information, read the information in the appendix in the back. And then question 11 dealt with supervision, any negative issues relating to supervision, and also read the responses in the back and the appendices. And then question 12 as it relates to AI. I think those three would be good. The other professions had about a 1 meeting head start, but they're looking at 2 at a time. So I think if we looked at 3, that might be a way to kind of limit how much information is being reviewed for the next meeting, but also allow you to kind of break this down into a little bit of a more digestible survey, since it is 175 pages. And that is likely to go up a little bit as we add a couple more appendices onto it. So appreciate all the licensees who provided feedback. There's a ton of information, and it's a lot of great information, and this will help the advisory committee and the board in terms of how we can identify problems and work on solutions. So.
I guess I wasn't really surprised at the majority saying they weren't very aware, if at all, of the advisory committee activities, except that we had such robust interest the last 2 times that we've needed to get replace members who were rotating off. We had, I think the first time we had 20 apply, and close to that the second time. So at least there's some social workers out there that are aware of enough to be interested in participating. So that's encouraging.
Yes. Well, Cynthia, I know we're short on time. The meeting's about over.
Yes.
We may need to go ahead and table the next item, the alternative pathway to licensure discussion.
Yes.
But I did want to highlight something under the next meetings. I provided a few attachments in your packet of material. That's not for discussion at this meeting, but in terms of all the regulations that you received. Basically, in the last few years, we've made it a conscious effort to bring the regulations to the advisory committees so that you can review those. And part of that is educational. You can understand what the requirements are. The board follows the statutes first and foremost, which are passed by bills going through and becoming law. But within the statutory framework, agencies have the ability to promulgate regulations to kind of flesh out the details of some of these topics. So in the last few years, we've brought forward regulations for you to review in terms of educational requirements for licensure, definitions, continuing education requirements, documentation for continuing education, unprofessional conduct. But we have a handful of items. Most of these are fairly small, but we do want to be good stewards of the regulations. And so we're asking you to review these for the next meeting. And then I think the discussion on these will go fairly quickly. There might be 0 updates or just some minimal ones to make sure that we are matching the statutes. But I wanted to make sure to say in the last few years that we have brought all the regulations to the advisory committees to at least review to see if there's any changes. And so between now and the next meeting, please review those and then be prepared to discuss if you have any recommended changes. And I'll have my staff take a look at those as well and see if they have any proposed changes as well. So.
And I would just like to say that I think part of our role as advisory committee members, and for Andrea and I as members of the board, is to be a resource to our peers. I haven't memorized all those regulations. I wouldn't expect any of you to, but to be familiar with them, certainly to be well-versed in application process for becoming licensed, and what some of these issues are that we are discussing and aware of. I think that makes us a valuable resource to our fellow social workers in the community, especially, reflecting that so many of them aren't really aware of all of those regulations or what the procedures are until it comes time for them to apply for a license themselves. But I think it could save a lot of issues for people if they were more aware of the whole arc of the process from beginning to end, and also understand more clearly what the regulations are for practicing, staying in their scope of practice. So, okay. Any other comments, questions before we adjourn for today? Our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, October 14th, same time, 10 a.m. And David will be communicating with all of our advisory committee members, I assume before then, David, about when we might sign up for our 1-hour annual training for participating on the board training. So, and if there are no other questions or comments, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. You guys want to hang out longer?
I motion to adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, Eric.
Me
Do I have a
too.
second? Thank you, Callie. We'll see you all in October. Everybody have a
Great.
great
Thank you.
end of the summer.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye-bye.